Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Hazika Akma binti Shahrudin. Today, I will present to you BIO150 study case. The topic is Chicago Cyanide Murders, a case study in cellular respiration. This is the content that we'll be covering today. First, we have to look at the introduction and problem statement. In September of 1982, Mary Kellerman gave her 12-year-old daughter a painkiller when she awoke during the night complaining of a sore throat. At 7 a.m. the next morning, her daughter was found collapsed on the bathroom floor and later pronounced dead. Adam Jennings, a postal worker in another Chicago suburb, also died unexpectedly, though originally it was thought he had suffered from a heart attack. While his family gathered to mourn their loss, his brother and sister became ill and later died. In the days that followed, 3 more unexplained deaths occurred in nearby Chicago suburbs. Investigators found that all of the victims had taken extra strange Tylenol hours before their death. They suspected that someone had tampered with the medication. Symptoms exhibited by each of the victims include weakness, dizziness, sleepiness, flushed bright red skin tone, headache, shortness of breath and rapid breathing, vomiting, confusion and disorientation. The autopsy report from this incident showed that the medical examiner concluded that each of the victims had died of hypoxia. Hypoxia means that the person suffered from a lack of oxygen or they were suffocated. The reason for the hypoxia is not always clear at the first examination. The medical examiner also showed the tissue samples from the heart, lungs, and liver show massive cell death. On further investigation, it was shown that the tissues had major mitochondrial damage. Even though the victims died of hypoxia, their level of oxygen in their blood was approximately 110 millimeters of mercury. The normal range is 75 to 100 millimeters of mercury. Toxicology reports show that the victims had been poisoned with cyanide. The poison was tracked back to extra-strength Tylenol, where the murderer had opened the capsules and replaced acetaminophen, a painkiller, with cyanide. Cyanide acts very quickly, often killing within minutes of ingestion, and authorities were slow to identify the cause of the death. As the cause is identified, stores removed Tylenol and other drugs from shelves. While there were many suspects, no one was ever charged with the crime and is still ongoing investigation. Since the Chicago Tylenol murders, drug companies have drastically changed how medicines are packed. First, we need to investigate how this happened, and we need to question why do we need oxygen. It seems like a simple question. Everyone knows you need to breathe to live. Have you ever thought about why oxygen is so important? The victims of the cyanide poisoning all had high levels of oxygen in their blood, but the poison was interfering with how the cells use that oxygen. To understand, we need to take a very close look at the structure of the mitochondrion. Inside the mitochondrion, there are several layers of membranes. In fact, these membranes resemble the membrane that surrounds the cell. It has a bilayer of phospholipids and embedded proteins. On the diagram below, the proteins are labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, and cytochrome C. The proteins in the membrane pass electrons from one to the other. This is known as the electron transport chain. The passing of these electrons allows ATP adenosine triphosphate to be generated. At the end of the electron transport chain, cytochrome C passes the electron to its final acceptor, oxygen. Oxygen then binds with proteins to create water. This process is continuous in cell with ATP constantly being generated and oxygen being used as the final electron acceptor. deletes cytochrome C, preventing the last protein from doing its job. The electron stops at the end of the chain and cannot be passed to oxygen. The whole chain grinds to a halt and no ATP can be made. Next, we will proceed with the questions. Question 1. What is the relationship between the ETC and oxygen? The relationship that exists between ETC as well as oxygen is that in the ETC, terminal electron acceptor is required and oxygen serves this purpose. The electron transport chain, which is ETC, can be regarded as chain involving series of protein complexes which carry out electron transfer from the donors to electron acceptors and thus referred to as redox reaction. Redox reaction involves both the reduction and oxidation which takes place simultaneously. In ETC, the oxygen is the electron acceptor, and in the body system, in case there is a shortage of oxygen, ETC usually serves as a backup. Therefore, electron transport chain involves transfer of electron between the donor and the acceptor, or the ATC passes electrons to oxygen and they work together to produce water and ATP. Next, question 2. Cyanide is an extremely fast-acting poison. In fact, it was developed as a suicide pill called L-pill during World War II so that British and American spies could avoid being captured alive. Given what you know about ATP and cellular respiration, explain why cyanide is so fast-acting. First, let me remind you what does cyanide do. Cyanide blocks last protein in the electron transport chain, cytochrome C, stopping oxygen from receiving electrons. At this time, glycolysis is still producing oxygen, but such a little amount that you can only stay alive for a short amount of time. The cell needs oxygen, O2, to produce energy that powers the heart, lungs, etc. Then we can answer the question. Cyanide is extremely fast-acting because it stops cells from delivering electrons to oxygen, meaning that ATP or chemical energy is no longer being made. This is a serious issue because ATP powers all cell functions and therefore body functions. This means that your heart, lungs, and other organs have no energy and shut down, almost immediately killing you, especially your body, and that you cannot function without a heart. Next, we will proceed with question 3. Given what you know about cyanide poisoning, do you think that giving a person oxygen will be an effective treatment? Why or why not? First, we need to look what causes cyanide poisoning and who's at risk. Cyanide poisoning is rare, but it does occur. It is typically the result of smoke inhalation or accidental poisoning when working with or around cyanide. You may be at risk for accidental exposure if you work in certain fields. Many inorganic cyanide salts are also used in the following industries: metallurgy, plastic manufacturing, and fumigation. Chemists may also be at risk as potassium and sodium cyanides are common reagents used in labs. You may also be at risk for cyanide poisoning if you 1. Use excessive amount of nail polish remover containing organic cyanide compounds like acetonitrile. 2. Ingest excessive amounts of certain plant-based foods such as apricot kernels, cherry rocks, and peach pits. And the answer for this question is, I do not think giving a person oxygen will be an effective treatment against cyanide poisoning because cyanide blocks cells from taking in oxygen and producing ATP. This means that all oxygen is blocked and any more oxygen will just be blocked as well, not treating the cyanide at all. Therefore, we need to remove the cyanide from bloodstream so it no longer stops the oxygen from being absorbed into the cells. I have included include additional notes if you ever encounter cyanide poisoning. What treatment options are available to treat cyanide poisoning? The first step to treating a suspected case of cyanide poisoning is to identify the source of exposure. This will help your doctor or other healthcare provider determine the appropriate decontamination method. In the case of a fire or other emergency incident, rescue personnel will use protective gear like face masks, eye shields, and double gloves to enter the area and take you to a safe location. If you have ingested cyanide, you may be given activated charcoal to help absorb the toxin and safely clear it from your body. Cyanide exposure can affect oxygen intake, so your doctor may administer 100% oxygen by a mask or endotracheal tube, which is given by the modern era and technology now. Can cyanide poisoning lead to any complications? If left untreated, acute or chronic cyanide poisoning may cause seizure, cardiac arrest, and coma. In some cases, cyanide poisoning may result in death, as evidenced in the case study today. If you suspect you or a loved one is experiencing symptoms of severe cyanide poisoning, seek immediate emergency medical attention. The conclusion for this case study is the ETC passes electrons to oxygen and work together to produce water and ATP. Cyanide inhibits cytochrome C, preventing the last protein from doing its job. The electron stops at the end of the chain and cannot be passed to oxygen. The whole chain grinds to a halt and no ATP can be made. This means that your heart, lungs, and other organs have no energy and shut down, almost immediately killing you. This is the reference that I used for this presentation. You can go take a look and I will link in this description below. Thank you for listening. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.